We touched on the column by former Top Gear presenter Jeremy Clarkson, and in it he confessed to loathing Meghan Markle on a, quote, cellular level and wanting her to perform a walk of shame and cue outrage. So joining me to discuss this, I have the Deputy Editor of Spiked, Fraser Myers. Fraser, thank you very much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Give us a background to what he wrote. What was the context?
So he's writing in response to the now infamous, Meghan and Harry docu-series and Meghan and Harry show, really, the whole kind of saga around their relationship with the royal family. And he was basically saying that he really is not a fan of Meghan Markle.
In a hyperbolic way.
I mean, it was ridiculously hyperbolic. He talks about loathing her on a cellular level. He hates her more than he hates Nicola Sturgeon and Rose West.
Yes.
And then, most infamously, he makes an allusion to Game of Thrones, where he talks about, he is so consumed by hatred for her, he is kept awake at night thinking about how he wants her to be driven through the streets of England naked and pelted with excrement. Yes,
which is what happens to Cersei Lannister in Game of Thrones. I know this show very well, and people are crying shame and shouting shame and that kind of thing. So, the hyperbole is the point. And actually, I often wonder with this kind of stuff, I think maybe Nicola Sturgeon was a step too far, but I understand the Rose West stuff. But, when you go that far, it actually becomes less offensive in a way. Because it's so extreme, and therefore the absurdity becomes obvious, right?
Well, you would think that even if you didn't find it funny, you would at least credit Clarkson with at least trying to make a joke.
Yeah.
But we live in a very humorless time, so immediately everyone on Twitter took it upon themselves to say this was misogynistic, this was racist, and then it even stepped up a notch where you had certain BBC presenters like Chris Packham say that this article was a hate crime, and that if there's any justice, Clarkson should be jailed and the Sun newspaper should be shut down. And then even worse was a group of MPs wrote an open letter essentially calling on the Sun to take definitive action to ensure nothing like this is ever published again.
Wow.
And that's where we go from, OK, we can disagree with the Clarkson column. We can say what we like about the Clarkson column. You can say you can use hyperbole in return. You could say you want to parade Clarkson through the streets and have him pelted with excrement, if you like. But then you're talking about censorship. Then you're talking about MPs thinking it's their right to edit the news. And that puts us in a very dangerous place.
So this is sort of surprising to me. Why can't we live in a society where people can say outrageous things if they want, offensive things if they want, and people can say, well, I find that really offensive or outrageous and this is why, and criticise in return? That's a good system because it means everyone gets to say what they want. Why do we have to call for censorship?
Well, exactly. The answer to bad speech is always more speech. Free speech is the counter to it. And, everyone has a right to disagree with Clarkson, and if you want to stand up for Meghan, that's,
Yeah, of course.
But why is it your prerogative?
I mean, he's actually apologised this time. I think we've got the text of his apology here somewhere. But it's very interesting that he actually gave that apology when normally he doesn't do that. He's made a number... There's his tweet apology. He says, I'd rather put my foot in it. In a column I wrote about Meghan, I made a clumsy reference to a scene in Game of Thrones that this has gone down badly with a great many people. I'm horrified to have caused so much hurt, and I shall be more careful in future. That does not sound like Jeremy Clarkson. He hasn't apologised for jokes that are even more extreme in the past. So what's changed?
I think our culture has become a lot more censorious. I mean, if you think about some of the, Clarkson controversies, on Top Gear when he was talking about... he was on the One Show, actually, in mid-afternoon talking about shooting, striking minors.
Yes.
He talked about truck drivers murdering prostitutes on Top Gear, making these kinds of outrageous jokes. And, they caused a bit of a controversy, but he didn't feel the need to apologise. There weren't people calling for him to be arrested.
No. So what has happened, and why has this happened so quickly?
Well, there's another factor, is that it's Meghan as well, who is basically kind of untouchable. It's almost like a royal of old, really. Back in the day, you couldn't criticise the king in the newspaper, and now it seems you're not really allowed to criticise Meghan. I mean, it's not just Clarkson who, he hasn't lost his job or anything yet, but there are calls for him to be sacked and arrested. But if you think about, Piers Morgan was kicked off Good Morning Britain because he said he didn't believe a word of Meghan's interview with Oprah Winfrey.
Yes.
We lost the head of the Society of Editors had to resign after that interview because he stood up for the press coverage of Meghan, saying it wasn't racist.
So that's a really interesting point when you mentioned the press and these people who are pushing now to censor the press as a result of this. So that, again, seemed to be a step further forward. Again, I go back to this point. Criticise the press all you like. But this is a slightly different thing, isn't it?
Well, I think there's always been this kind of undercurrent of, anti-press feeling around us, particularly against the tabloids. I mean, we saw that really, probably the high point of that was the Leveson inquiry. And, we came very close to having a state-backed press regulator in Britain. For a while, there was a law on the statute book that was going to strong-arm newspapers into signing up to an official, state regulator with a royal charter and all these kind of, archaic things. And they would have been fined, and they would have been, companies would have basically had to pay the losses of anyone who complained and things like that. It would have been a disaster for press freedom. We very narrowly escaped that.
Yes.
And I think, a lot of people who, ironically, would call themselves liberals think that it should be the job of the state to tell the press what it can and can't print.
I mean, it's interesting with Leveson, isn't it? Because with that act, there was always the possibility that rich people would be able to prevent the press from criticising it, which is a dreadful situation. But there were elements of that seemed quite reasonable, such as if the press make print a story that is false, that they would have to then print the retraction in the same place on the front cover, in the same side. That seems like a reasonable thing, doesn't it?
That's completely reasonable. And, obviously there were the other elements that were the phone hacking scandal, which was a crime, and people broke the law and arrested for it. So that didn't necessarily call for more government intervention. Yes. But I think there is this kind of long-running prejudice about the tabloids, and in particular their readers. Yeah. There's this idea that, a lot of the kind of MPs and stuff were talking about the Clarkson's column coming in a context of an epidemic of violence against women and girls. Right. Sadiq Khan said words have consequences about this column. The implication seemed to be that, your average Sun reader is just one Jeremy Clarkson column away from, assaulting a woman.
Where's that come from? Because it's simply not true. Yeah. It is not the case that Jeremy Clarkson's column will have resulted in a rise of violence. I mean, they made the same case when Boris Johnson made the joke about Muslim women wearing the burqa and letterboxes. They said that the hate crimes escalated by this much, or I can't remember, but something like 300%. And those figures were completely debunked when they were actually analysed. It's not true that these kind of outrageous comments ever lead to violence.
No, it's not true at all. It's just, it's prejudice. It's prejudice. It's saying that, there are thick people out there, the kind of people that read the tabloids. They're monkey see, monkey do. They hear, or you hear this phrase, it's a dog whistle all the time, don't you, around racism or misogyny. Yeah. Who are the dogs?
Yes, exactly.
Right? They're talking about the great British public.
But it does strike me as odd that he apologised, and I think, does this have a chilling effect on other people? Other people who are going to write in a certain way? And does it affect, some columnists are quite sparky and quite robust, and there's an appeal to that. If you think of people like Julie Burchill, Camille Paglia, these kind of... it's fun to read that kind of personality, but what will happen to those sorts of things?
Absolutely, I think it will have a chilling effect. If having the threat of intervention or regulation is, that's something that weighs very heavily on editors' minds. And it's a good reminder that the press, obviously the press does some brilliant work in exposing corruption and, exposing wrongdoing and things like that, and that's all very important. But there's also another side to the press, which is just making fun of things, throwing excrement at celebrities.
Well, just invoking Game of Thrones.
And that part of it, you do want to have scarbrous and sparky commentary and a lively kind of discussion and debate about all kinds of issues. It doesn't all have to be high-minded and sometimes boring.
And what about this idea of hate? I mean, you mentioned Chris Packham talking about how this is a hate crime. But why, as human beings, shouldn't we be allowed to hate?
Well, we should be allowed to hate, and we should be allowed to express our hatred for people and things as we see fit. I think what's happened with this Clarkson column is that because it's about Meghan Markle, there's a kind of trend where anyone criticises Meghan Markle, they're instantly derided as either racist or misogynist.
Yes.
And, that is a kind of unacceptable form of hate that I don't think newspapers would want to print anyway, even if, they should be allowed to, but I don't think they'd want to.
Well, it wouldn't be commercially viable, right? We live in a society where people don't
like that kind of thing. So there's a forever kind of expansion of what it means to, or of the meaning of hate speech or hate. So as soon as you say, let's ban hate speech, then pretty quickly some quite innocuous things end up getting caught up.
Well, because no one knows what it means, do they? No one really knows what hate means.
Even the I think it's the European Convention on Human Rights have tried to define hate speech, and the best they can come up with is speech that is hateful.
Yes.
So it's completely in the eye of the beholder. It's completely subjective. So it's just a kind of recipe for endless censorship.
So what will change all of this? Will it just be when they do cause offence for whatever reason, which is inevitable because we're human beings, is it just that they need to stop apologising for it?
Yeah, I think that would help. But I think it would help if more people stood up for free speech. When there's an offensive column, people should stand up for someone's right to make that point.
Even if they themselves are offended, right?
Exactly. Even if they're offended, even if they disagree. I mean, you've got to fight for the freedom of the thought that you hate.
Yeah.
I mean, Stalin believed for free speech for the ideas he liked.
Yeah.
So that's the test of whether you really believe in free speech.